Hi, in this screencast I'm just going to quickly explain what the evidence is that you should have already produced for assignment 1, task 1. So first off, if we look here, you should have already done tasks 1, task 2, B, part I, part 2, part 3. There's a separate screencast on what you need to do for part 3 and part 4. So if you look at that one for that detail. All I'm going to do now is show you an example of what this other evidence should look like. So this view of some example evidence shows that they've introduced the section. So for under 1, I've created multiple interfaces for my program using a wide variety of toolbox controls. For instance, this interface shows that I've used different controls. So for instance, I've dragged and dropped them onto here. These boxes must point at what the evidence actually is. So what control is this? What control is this? What control is this? What control are these? What do I use this for? Then you could use the properties reference table to say which controls you've used, what the reason for using them is, what their properties are that you've changed, and what the purpose of those properties is. You should then have gone on and shown the actual how you went about changing them for one particular thing. So here we've got a label, and he's talked about what he's changed the name to make it uniquely identified. He's changed the colours, so see what he wants it to be. Then for section 2, you should have something like this, where he explained what a constant is, what the difference between a variable and a constant is, why you've used certain variables, their data types, their data type and their scope. So why you've used a string, why you've used a string, why you've used a whole number for this, why an integer, why these are global scope because they're at the top and they can be used everywhere. Example of where I used a local variable, and in this case particularly this is because they're inside a private sub and they're only needed inside there. In terms of section 3 on selection, you should have an introduction like this. I've used if selection statements to process user answers to all my quiz questions. For instance, the check Q3 event handler, and in the btn check Q4 click event handlers have used if statements as follows. He's got two different examples here, one where he's used a single change and one where he's picked up on multiple values. Either way, you need to explain what they do. And it would be best if there'd been pictures of the interfaces here to go with them. It would make it much clearer as to what's going on. Then under functions and subroutines, again, I used a function, a named block of code, in this case called Q4 check workout feedback, in button check 4 to find out what the appropriate feedback should be. This is how he's called it, this is what he's passed it, and it returns the answer and puts it into the feedback Q4 text for the label. Here's how he's defined it, said what's been set, tells me that it defines a Q4 workout feedback. It returns the appropriate feedback based on how many options they got right. This is better evidence here because he's got an example of what's produced. He's introduced it, and I've deliberately taken off what he said here. He used a loop when he needed to dynamically fill up a list. In this case, from Q1 to 24, you'll have used something else. The for loop, which is the thing at line 4, so this thing here is being run as your comment should have told you, however many times you specified. So in this case it's been run to 24 times, hence this from 1 to 24. I also used an event for each loop when I wanted to dynamically fill up a combo box. In this case with words, and you need to find an appropriate example, and as we did here, show what it produces, show the code, and try to explain what it does. The last bit that by now you should have done is the bit about using different event handlers. So it needs introducing, it needs explaining that the users type something in here, hit that has been used to respond to a certain event, and it needs to be clear what it is that it's responding to. So at the moment this arrow here is not at all clear where it's pointing to, so it's supposed to be pointing at this click. So that's the event. The whole of this over here, right, so that bit there, that is the event trigger function. So that bit there is the trigger function. This thing here is the event handler. In other words, the code that responds when the user clicks this particular button. So when they click btn check q1 click, the trigger function, it in turn calls this event handler which is executed. You need to talk about more than one. So here's a separate example. This is from Q2. Again, the user picks something from the combo box. The event that's fired off needs to be clear. So in this case, the event that's fired is selected index changed. So that needs to appear in here. And then the trigger function is the entire thing. So the trigger function is all of this. The event is just the second half. The trigger function needs to know the object as well as the event, so it knows which one did it. And over here, all of this, as it clearly says here, is the thing called event handler. So this is the code that you've written to respond. If you hadn't written that code, it would do nothing. The screencast in Task2, the next screencast explains to you how to use the debugging tools. And remember, you need to introduce it and explain it in a bit more detail. But I've gone through that in more detail in the next one.